Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, April 19th. We begin our cast with an update on the war in Ukraine. Russia is intensifying its assaults on Ukraine's eastern industrial heartland. Its goal is to capture the Donbas region, where separatists have been fighting Ukrainian forces for 8 years. And if the offensive is successful, it would give President Vladimir Putin a vital piece of Ukraine and a badly needed victory in the 7-week-old war. A Russian victory would also effectively slice Ukraine in two and deprive it of the main industrial assets concentrated in the east. This is including coal mines, metals plants, and machine-building factories. Back at home, the federal government has hit 14 more Russians with sanctions for their close ties with President Vladimir Putin, including his 2 adult daughters. The federal government says the 2, as well as a dozen other Russians, are facing sanctions because they are close associates of Mr. Putin and are complicit in Russia's unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine. In a tweet, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the government won't relent on holding people close to Mr. Putin accountable for the conflict. Mr. Trudeau also announced today that Canada will be sending heavy artillery to Ukraine. He added more details will be provided in the days to come. While on the East Coast, Nova Scotians are again marking the worst shooting in modern Canadian history today with a moment of silence. 22 people were killed during a 2-day shooting rampage that began in the community of Portapique on April 18, 2020. Flags at government buildings are to remain at half-mast until sunset this evening. Turning to the Canadian manufacturing industry, which is again facing a risk of being hit by U.S. protectionism. The challenge comes after the Biden administration announced new procurement guidance on Monday. It requires the construction material purchased for federally funded infrastructure projects be produced within the United States. Dennis Darby, head of Canadian manufacturers and exporters, says the U.S. provisions are likely intended to be more targeted towards countries like China. But he says Canada will have to work hard to secure carve-outs and waivers to protect access to the American market. Taking a look at the annual pace of housing starts now, which dipped from February to March. This comes as the pace of urban starts slowed by 2%. Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says the annual rate of multi-unit urban starts fell 5%. The pace of single-detached urban starts rose 8%. Meanwhile, the Canadian Real Estate Association reports that home sales fell 16.3% from a record high a year ago. But prices were up 11.2% on a year-over-year basis to an average of just over $796,000. The drop in sales came as the number of newly listed homes fell 5.5% on a month-over-month basis in March. The latest Leger poll is offering a picture of how many Canadians have been infected with COVID-19. Almost 25% of respondents to the online poll said they have had COVID. That would be a higher rate of infection than official data suggests. The poll reveals 30% of respondents in the 18 to 34-year-old age range said they had COVID versus 12% of those 55 plus. 38% of unvaccinated respondents said they had been infected versus 20% of vaccinated people. Well, this comes as some health officials are predicting the current increase in COVID-19 hospitalizations will continue for another month. The Public Health Agency of Canada reports hospitalizations rose about 18% between the 4th and 11th of this month. Saskatchewan's top doctor says Canadians have unfinished business when it comes to getting vaccinated. This with the bulk of hospitalizations in that province driven by unvaccinated people or those who hadn't had a booster shot. A delegation from the Manitoba Métis Federation has left for Rome ahead of a meeting with Pope Francis. Thursday's meeting at the Vatican was arranged before the pontiff apologized to a larger visiting Indigenous delegation earlier this month. It was for the Roman Catholic Church's role in the Canadian residential school abuse. Federation President David Chartrand says now that the Pope has issued an apology to all Indigenous peoples, the meeting can focus on the need to renew the relationship between Red River Métis and the Catholic Church. Some chilly weather on the West Coast has some BC cherry farmers using helicopters to try to protect their orchards from a cold snap. The helicopters push warm air over trees rather than letting cool air sit over orchards and potentially damage buds waiting to blossom. BC Cherry Growers Association President Sukhpal Bal says despite cooler temperatures, he feels optimistic for a good crop. More news from around the world coming up next. Stay tuned. A regional governor in eastern Ukraine says 5 civilians have been killed by Russian shelling. The Kharkiv region governor said Tuesday that another 17 residents were wounded in the Russian rocket barrage in the center of Kharkiv and its outskirts. Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, has faced Russian attacks since the start of the Russian invasion on February 24th. Well, joining us now to give us an on-the-ground perspective of what's happening in Kharkiv is Timur, a Kharkiv native who is helping to bring food, water, and diapers to those who are unable to evacuate in the Saltovka area. He is joined by team member Bronislava Shmilovich from Washington, who joins us through audio to translate. Timur, Bronislava, thank you again for joining us today. We've got a lot to unpack, so I'm going to jump right in. Now, Timur, you are calling us from a war zone. There have been Russian shelling attacks in Kharkiv since February 24th. Tell us about the obstacles that you and your team are facing while trying to bring these necessities to people in Saltovka.
Yeah, that's
Да, в данный момент у нас очень все тяжело на Салтовке. Еда доходит с огромнейшими проблемами, на самом деле. Ни одна организация нам не помогает. Мы сами действуем так, что нам на PayPal скидывают деньги люди, хорошие люди, и мы закуповываем все и разносим людям под выстрелами, под бомбежками со стороны России. Мы это делаем. Многие из наших ребят уже попадали в очень тяжелый момент.
The situation is very hard in Kharkiv. We are being bombed and shelled constantly by the Russian forces. Our team is trying to get aid to the residents of Kharkiv. We have not been able to obtain aid from any of the larger organizations that are on the ground. So the situation is very difficult in our area.
Sounds like you've got a very brave team over there, Timur. So what is needed most for the people in the Kharkiv region right now?
Еда. Нам нужна еда, больше всего еда. Памперсы для детей и еда, которую можно принести в подвалы людям.
They need food, and again, food, pampers, and baby items. The food that can be sustained in the basements, because that's where the most of the residents are.
And from previous conversations, we know some of your team members have been injured. You're literally risking your lives in Kharkiv. So how is your team managing while working in this dangerous environment? What's keeping you guys going?
Наш несломленный дух. Мы украинцы, и мы готовы сражаться до конца. Нас не поставить на колени. Мы страна, которая не станет никогда рабами, и у нас есть демократия в нашей стране. Мы не Россия, мы не под диктатурой. Мы страна, у которой есть демократия, мы готовы умирать за это. Мы готовы умирать за нашу свободу.
Our unwavering spirit is what gets us through. We're not slaves to any forces. We're Ukrainians, and we have democracy. So what will get us through these hard times is our hearts, because we stand with Ukraine.
All right, Timur, how can our Canadian viewers help your team's efforts in Kharkiv?
Могут нам помогать, скидывать какие-то пожертвования на PayPal, потому что это единственный способ так далеко нам помогать. Это единственный способ. Больше не знаю, каких способов. Или отправлять еду.
At this moment, the only way that anyone can help from a distance is to be able to contribute to our PayPal, because this is the only way we've been successful in purchasing food for our neighbors. Or you can try to send food, however, it's not reaching us, as you have seen. So PayPal from abroad really makes an impact on the people of Kharkiv.
And for our viewers, we will be displaying Timur's PayPal for you to donate if you are interested. All right, for some more perspective, Timur, we know Kharkiv has been facing Russian shelling since February 24th. What is left of your home?
Моего дома нету. И домов моих друзей нету. Мы на Северной Салтовке, это самый опасный район сейчас в Харькове. Нас разбомбили. Домов нету, люди умирают.
I don't have a home. My friends have lost a home. We're in North Saltovka. Everything has been bombed. People are dying. There's nothing left.
That's very hard to hear, Timur. We've got about a minute left here, but do you have any last messages for our Canadian viewers today?
У тебя есть какие-то последние слова для канадских viewers?
Да. Поддержите нас, пожалуйста. Поддержите Украину. Дайте нам поддержку. Это единственное, что может быть, только спасение. Все.
Yes, please support us. Support us as any way you can, because that's the only thing that will save us. Please support Ukraine.
Most.
Timur, thank you for your bravery and thank you for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you.
All right, stay with us. Coming up next, we take a deeper look at Russia's invasion of Ukraine and genocide. This comes after comments by U.S. President Joe Biden about the issue. But what is the legal definition of genocide and what does it mean for policymakers? We'll be speaking about this with an expert after the break. Professor Leila Sadat joins us shortly. Stay with us. U.S. President Joe Biden says Russia's attack on Ukraine and Ukrainians amounts to genocide. Mr. Biden accuses President Vladimir Putin of trying to wipe out the idea of even being a Ukrainian. Declaring any targeted campaign aimed at wiping out a group as genocide is not just a strong word. It could carry obligations to act. That's partly because of a genocide treaty approved by the UN General Assembly in the years immediately after World War II, which was signed by the United States and more than 150 other nations. Well, joining us now to give us deeper insight into whether the Russian invasion can be legally designated as a genocide is Ms. Leila Sadat, a special advisor to the International Criminal Court prosecutor and director of the Crimes Against Humanity Initiative. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with this, ma'am. What constitutes as a genocide under the genocide treaty approved by the UN General Assembly?
So genocide means a crime committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a racial, national, ethnic, or religious group. It's a very serious crime.
So what is the significance of Joe Biden himself calling this a genocide? What is likely to come from this move?
You know, one of the things that's so interesting is we've seen in the past sort of a failure of states to label crimes as they're happening. They don't want to use the word genocide. They don't want to call something a crime against humanity. So I think it's very positive that President Biden has decided to actually use the word genocide. Whether it can be proven in a court of law is another issue, but it is a very, very serious step that the United States and Canada have taken, which requires them to commit themselves to some kind of action, not necessarily a military action, but some kind of action whereby they agree to help prevent and potentially to punish these acts of genocide if they can be proven.
All right, ma'am. So I guess the big question here would be whether the actions committed by Russian forces in Ukraine can realistically be designated as a genocide.
That, of course, is always the issue. We have seen it very, very difficult to prove in a court of law that something even as awful as what we're seeing on our television screens now with respect to Ukraine is actually a genocide. Because what you need is that sort of smoking gun, that actual statement and that connection between the leader and the crimes on the ground, that the crimes were committed with this specific criminal intent to destroy the group. And sometimes even when we have evidence of intent, we don't have a significant enough crime. Sometimes we have significant crimes, but we don't have specific evidence of the intent. So as a criminal lawyer, normally I would say these are easier to charge as a crime against humanity. And in fact, most of the reports we're getting from the OSCE and from other observer missions are focusing more on war crimes and crimes against humanity. But that said, the fact that the president and the prime minister use the idea of genocide is important.
Important indeed. All right, ma'am. Well, what further steps do world leaders need to take in order to move forward this potential designation of genocide?
Well, what they really need to do is support the investigations of the International Criminal Court and Ukraine's federal prosecutor. Many states have dispatched teams of investigators to the ground, and we need to now collect the evidence, establish the evidence, and stand very much unified when there's pushback against the allegations of criminality, which there already have been from the Russian Federation, which has stated that it has not committed crimes. The evidence thus far that we have shows a widespread pattern of criminality, and the ICC prosecutor himself, when requesting the issuance of arrest warrants in the Georgia situation, actually pointed out the similarity in the pattern in the Georgia conflict in 2008 and the current pattern we're seeing on the ground: attacks on the Mariupol maternity hospital, attacks on the theater, shelling of apartment buildings, allegations of torture and rape, deportation, disappearances. These are very, very significant crimes, and they look very similar to what we've seen in the past. So right now we're trying to document the offenses, collect the evidence, and of course support the Ukrainian people as they address this crisis.
We'll definitely have to keep our eyes on this developing situation. Professor Sadat, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Coming up after the break, we have more news from around the world. The IMF cuts its global growth forecast down to 3.6%. Russia issues a new ultimatum to Ukrainian defenders in Mariupol, and explosions targeting 2 education centers in Afghanistan's capital of Kabul kill at least 6 people. These stories and more up next. The International Monetary Fund is cutting its forecast for global growth to 3.6% this year. That's down from 6.1% growth last year and from the 4.4% growth it predicted for 2022 just 4 months ago. The 190-country lender is blaming Russia's war in Ukraine for disrupting global commerce, pushing up oil prices, threatening food supplies, and increasing uncertainty already heightened by the pandemic. Meanwhile, Russia has issued a new ultimatum to Ukrainian defenders holed up in a huge steel plant in Mariupol. They represent what's believed to be the last major pocket of resistance in the port city in the Donbass region that the Russians have besieged since the early days of the war. Russia says anyone who comes out of the plant will keep their lives, and that a ceasefire is being declared in the area so the combatants can leave. The Ukrainians have ignored previous offers, and there is no immediate confirmation that a ceasefire is in effect. Well, violence is also plaguing Afghanistan. An Afghan police spokesperson says multiple explosions targeting a school and another educational testing center in Kabul have killed at least 6 people and injured 17 others, including 7 children. More casualties are feared from the blasts in the mostly Shiite Muslim area in the west of Afghanistan's capital. The explosions occurred in rapid succession near Abdul Rahim Shaheed High School and inside an education center where exams are taken. No one has immediately claimed responsibility. All right, moving to the U.S. now, which is sending 2 top officials to the Solomon Islands. This is following a visit by an Australian senator over concerns that China could establish a military presence in the South Pacific island nation. Kurt Campbell, the National Security Council Indo-Pacific Coordinator, and Daniel Crittenbrink, the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, will lead the U.S. delegation, which is visiting the Solomon Islands, Fiji, and Papua New Guinea this week. In Beijing, a foreign ministry official says China and the Solomon Islands recently signed a security pact. Staying in the U.S., where major airlines and many airports rushed to drop their mask mandates following a Florida judge's ruling. The U.S. Transportation Security Administration announced shortly after the decision was handed down that it wouldn't enforce a January 2021 security directive that applied to airplanes, airports, taxis, and other mass transit. However, New York City's public transit system is keeping its mask mandate in place, and ride-hailing company Lyft says masks are still required. This while Uber says masks are recommended, but no longer required. Meantime, Johnson & Johnson is suspending sales forecasts for its COVID-19 vaccine due to a global supply surplus and uncertainties about demand. The move comes just a few months after the healthcare giant said the shot could bring in as much as $3.5 billion this year. Vaccine options from rival drug makers Pfizer and Moderna have been much more commonly used so far in the U.S., where overall vaccine sales have slowed in recent weeks. Moving to Europe now, where the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control is reporting more cases of a mysterious liver disease in children that was first identified in Britain. British officials have reported 74 cases of hepatitis or liver inflammation since January. Cases have now been identified in Denmark, Ireland, the Netherlands, and Spain. The usual viruses that cause infectious hepatitis have been ruled out, and scientists and doctors are considering other possible sources, including COVID-19, other viruses, and environmental factors. South Africa has declared a national state of disaster. This comes after floods that have killed over 440 people, displaced more than 40,000, and nearly destroyed 4,000 homes. The government is allocating $67 million to help everyone affected, and it's sending the military to deliver food, water, and clothing. President Cyril Ramaphosa is blaming climate change for the heaviest rains in at least 60 years. And a woman from BC tried to dethrone a fellow Canadian from her stint as Jeopardy champ Monday night, but failed in her quest. Musician and educator Caitlin Hayes of North Vancouver was one of two new contestants facing off against multiple winner Matea Roach. Although Ms. Hayes was the only contestant to get Final Jeopardy correct in the category World Literature, Ms. Roach didn't wager enough to lose the night, and she is now a 10-day Jeopardy champion. The 23-year-old Halifax native and Toronto tutor won about $17,000. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.